Well, there you go.
Fantastic.
We're back, and technology is the forefront of our minds, but that's okay. That's what happens when you're dealing and understanding your higher self. When your lower self is really taken over and the mindset changes quite substantially, you become quite human, and your thoughts and the aspirations seem to go out the window. Anyway, told the girls what the sounds of a crow sounds like, and any Australian watching would understand what I've just said. Anyway, without further ado, the butterfly's landed. There he is, butterfly's there. And without further ado, we're going to go straight to Priti, my co-host, Priti Pauline, of course, and the guest is in the middle, so all the way from West Sussex. All right, back to you, Pauline.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeff. We've had a few little hiccups, like you said, and I don't think I want to know what your higher thoughts were that were going on in your head for the last half an hour. They weren't full of dignity and grace and patience, and I'm sure there was one heck of a chit chat that was going on in there that is blue in the air all around. But here we are, and the higher self came through, and the humble words are about to start. Welcome, Janet.
Thank
Welcome,
you.
welcome, welcome. What a treat.
Well, it's very nice to be with you, certainly, after all the technical problems. But yeah,
Well,
so
that's the beauty of live streaming, and the
yeah,
fact that we are all connected, even if it's 30 minutes on down the road. Here we are,
yes,
and what a joy! What a great, great joy it is to um, marvel at the wonders in the end of technology and of the infinite wisdom that they're surrounded by us. So, Janet, what can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where did you start? What was it
well,
that brought you to this spiritual journey?
well, originally I went for a reading with a man in London, and he said, "Well, you're very psychic. Have you ever thought of going to the spiritualist church?" And I said, "Oh, no, I don't want to get involved in funny sects and funny religions." And he said, "Go to Richmond Spiritualist Church. It's a big church. They're very friendly. You'll be all right there." So off I went. And he was right. It was a big church and they were very friendly. It was the Unitarian church, and the Unitarians used it in the morning and the spiritualists used it in the evening. And so I liked the service. No theology, no dogma, sending out a few thoughts for the sick to start the service, and then a reading by some American Indian or somebody like that, and then a demonstration at the end of it of clairvoyance. And so I liked that service, so I continued to go. But I wanted more knowledge somehow, so I read all the books in the library, and that didn't really do it. And then eventually I was invited to join a development circle. And so I sat in somebody's home with half a dozen other people, and I was trained by a lady called Linda Apthorpe, and she had been trained in the 1930s, so she was getting on a bit when I met her. And after I'd been there a couple of weeks, she looked at me and she said, "Well, I just seen you at the court of Mary Queen of Scots." She said you were sitting in the solar spinning, and she said you were very cross about something, but that's where you learnt, that's where you first met me, and you've come back to learn more from me this time. And I knew she was right, because when somebody tells you the truth, your whole system goes, "Ooh, yes," your heart swells a little. And so I'd love that Tudor period. I love the pearl earrings and the dresses and those tall red chimneys. So I knew she was right because I loved that Tudor period. And then another day, a few weeks further on, she looked at me again and she said, "Well, I've just seen you at the court of Marie Antoinette," she said. "You weren't very nice. It didn't do you any good. You lost your head, And so I said, "Oh."
An
And
awful
in
lot
those
of
days,
people in the courts of Marie Antoinette did lose their heads. I'm pretty sure of it.
yeah, yes, exactly. And so in those days, I was an actress and I'd just come back from a stint in the theatre. And she said to me, you've just met somebody from that time and you've done it again. You weren't very nice to them this time either. And so she said, in the next few weeks, you're going to meet somebody else from that time. Now, don't mess it up. So I was very nice to everyone in case I got it wrong. But I knew exactly who that woman was. You know, in my mind's eye, I could see her in one of those red woolly hats that the revolutionaries wore. And in my own defense, she was a bit of a pain in the what's it to not just me, but everyone else in the company. And then, a bit further down the line, she said to me, well, you won't start work until you're 50. And I said, oh, I'm only 24. And she said, well, I'm sorry, but that's what they're telling me. So I expect that's the way it'll be. So, of course, that's exactly what happened. So I carried on with my acting career. And I carried on with all the things that she taught me. You know, she taught me meditation and healing and all the things that I'm still using today. In the 1980s, I opened a spiritual centre in Chiswick in West London and sold spiritual books and had tarot readings and sold all the other things that those spiritual centres used to sell in those days, you know, tarot cards and pyramids and pendulums and all of that stuff, because that's the stuff that makes the money. My joy was selling the books, but actually you don't make a lot of money out of selling spiritual books. So the money was made from all the other stuff. So I had that shop for about 10 years. And then, of course, I got to 49 and my life sort of fell apart.
Okay.
So at 49, I then sold my shop, sold my house, stayed in London for another couple of years. In the 1960s, I'd had 2 children which went off to be adopted, and I didn't get them back for 27 years. So I found my 2 children again in that period of time. And then eventually I moved down to the south coast to Brighton. And I lived on the seafront for a while, and I didn't know what I was doing with myself. I'd given away all my spiritual books and all the pictures and everything. I was fed up with all this spirituality nonsense. And I didn't know what I was doing with myself. And then I kept bumping into this man on the seafront, on the bus, in the supermarkets, a chap that I'd known in London. And he said to me, oh, I'm just going off to do this past life regression course. Why don't you come with me? And I said, oh, well, in the absence of anything better to do with my life, okay. So we both started this course together. He did about 2 modules of it and said, oh, I don't think I'm going to continue with this because I don't really understand what they're talking about. And I said, oh, I love it, because I'd always been interested in karma and reincarnation. So I carried on with my course. And then when I finished it, one of my friends said to me, you should go to Hong Kong. So I said, oh, how do I do that? And she said, oh, just email the New Age shop in Hong Kong. So I said, oh, okay. So I emailed the New Age shop in Hong Kong. Unbeknownst to me, a new woman had just taken over that shop. The day before, she had sent out to the universe, I'd like a new regression person, please. And so she opened her emails, and there I was. So I went to Hong Kong. I met somebody in Hong Kong who said, oh, I've got a centre in Bangkok. Would you like to come and work there? Somebody else said, oh, there's a centre in Singapore you could go to. So I suddenly found myself on this world circuit, working with all these people from different cultures, different religions, different ethnologies, all of that. So definitely divinely guided my life has been. Really? So that's what I've been doing. I've been a past life regression therapist for the last 30 years. So yes.
Well, with a bit of luck, we'll have cleared a fair bit of karma this morning in the half an hour in which we were before we completely made the full connection. So
yes.
you on literally on a whim and a prayer, you just decided to up and off you go to Hong Kong. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I heard you correctly, yeah?
Yeah, you certainly did.
And then
so that was it. From Hong Kong,
so
that's that all. I'm just putting my earrings in, which I just found in my pocket.
Okay, so from Hong Kong, it was up to Bangkok. And what kind of things, what activities were you doing in those places? Is a shop that you went to, was it? And
no, I used to work in
regressions.
Mostly in little spiritual centres. So the place in Bangkok was a very beautiful house off Sukhumvit, which is the main thoroughfare through Bangkok. And it was run by 4 English people. And so I had a room there and they did all the bookings for me. And so I went there 2 or 3 times. And the same with Hong Kong, the same with Singapore and Australia and America and India and all the other places that I've been to. I've always worked in little spiritual centers and also in Australia too. My son got married up in the rainforest. And so I worked my way down on a bus from Cairns down to Townsville. And when I when I was buying my bus ticket to get this bus down the coast of Australia, the man selling the ticket said, and this is not that long ago, this is, I don't know, 20 years ago perhaps, he said to me, "Which university do you go to?" And I said, "Brighton." And he said, "That'll be the one then." And he gave me this student ticket so I could get on this bus and get off. And then I'd work in Townsville, and then I'd work in somewhere else, and then I went down to Byron Bay and met up with my ex-brother-in-law and stayed with them and worked in a little centre in Byron Bay. And I got back on my bus again and went down to Sydney. So I've always been divinely guided wherever I've gone. So
Yeah.
I'm very, very blessed.
Yeah. Clearly a student all the way through. So age
Yeah.
doesn't define your
No.
capacity to be a student.
No, you never stop learning. You never, ever stop learning. There's always more to learn.
And clearly the bus driver knew that too.
Yes. They were very kind, all those bus drivers, I must say. They kept saying, "Come and sit up the front," and they'd point things out to me, and they were really kind. It was lovely.
Okay, so for anybody who's listening that has never heard of the term past life regression, what can you tell us about past life regression and how and the impact it has in day-to-day life now?
Yeah. Well, some people come to past life regression because they're just curious to know who they've been in their previous life. Some people know that they've got an issue that they know they've brought in from a previous life and they want to deal with that. So there are lots of reasons why people will come to a past life regression therapist. For myself, I will have a little chat with you first of all, just to work out what your life has been like, what kind of issues you need to deal with, where we need to go in the session. And then in the session, I take you back from last week, back through this life, just helping you release and let go and heal those traumas and painful moments and the things that everybody has to experience in life. And then back into your early childhood, back into the womb, see how your mother was feeling when she was carrying you, by which time you're in a very deeply relaxed state. And then I just use a little hypnosis or a breathing technique or whatever it involves to just move you over into those previous lives. So you have to use your imagination and your intuition. You know, some people are visual, so some people will actually see images or pictures. Some people are audial, so won't see or hear anything, but just will get words or impressions or hear something. Some people don't see or hear anything, but just have a kind of knowing of where they are and who they are and what they're doing. So that's the process that I go through in the session. So it takes quite a long time. It's 2 or 3 hours. So you've got lots of time to see and feel and experience and release and heal and whatever else you need to do.
I'm kind of assuming if you're going back through the portal of the womb, that you're back into the infinite. So time is of no consequence, really.
That's right. You just
Is that a
step
fair
through into
assessment?
that. Yes, it is. Absolutely. You just step through into that other dimension.
Okay. And what kind of interesting experiences have you had? Which were the ones that are the standout experiences?
Oh, gosh, let me think. Well, I had a woman who came to me with a shoulder problem that she'd had for quite a long time. She had been to chiropractors, osteopaths, healers, you name it. None of them had been able to do anything about this shoulder problem.
Mhm.
And quite soon after we started the session, she suddenly leant forward and she was sitting in the chair and she was doing this with her arm, like she was being pulled. And
Oh,
uh,
ah,
this went on. This went on for quite a few minutes, and then she just flopped back in the chair. So I said, "Okay, so what was happening there?" And she said, "Well," she said, "I was being pulled along by a horse. They tied me to the back of a horse, and they pulled me along by my arm over quite a
oh,
long distance." And so then she said, then these men came and they kicked me and they thumped me and they killed me. And she said, so
ah,
in my spirit body, I was looking down on myself and I could see I was wearing a pale blue robe. And she said, I think I was a monk. Anyway, she was quite happy about that. And off she went. And a couple of days later, she emailed me and she said, or she rang me, I can't remember now because it's a long time ago, but she said she'd done a little bit more work in meditation about this situation, and her intuition or her guides and masters had told her that she had been an Albigensian monk who were part of the Cathars in France, who were all killed by the Inquisition. And she was told that she had been an Albigensian monk and that she had died thinking that she had failed God. But actually, what had happened was she had not failed God. She had done her best right up to the moment of her death. And so that had solved her shoulder problem. She no longer had the shoulder problem. And she'd also had rather low self-esteem, although she was quite bright and articulate and quite intelligent. So she felt much better about herself and she got her self-esteem back. So I mean, that was an extraordinary life that she had.
so
And then, sorry, go on.
yeah, the past life story
Hmm.
helped her right here, right now.
Yes,
In that
absolutely.
because she had this elaborate story of being a monk and that she'd failed everything and that she was, nothing was working properly, and right up to the very minute, then that story helped her
Heal herself.
right heal herself. Yes, so she got
Mm.
another perspective on what
Yeah,
she was doing, and that she was in fact serving God, and she
yeah,
still is carrying on, or was carrying
yeah,
on serving God, and
yeah.
that helped her.
Yes, that definitely helped her. But she certainly didn't have her shoulder problem anymore that she'd had for many, many years. Mm.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
Uh, so I've had certainly lots and lots of, very interesting cases over the years. Um, I've had a lot of people who have died in concentration camps and things.
Yeah.
Uh, I found myself working in Norway, which was another extraordinary experience. I was doing a radio interview in Brighton, and a Norwegian journalist was fiddling with his dial looking for a classical music station. And so he heard me doing this talk on the radio. And so he rang me up and said, could he do an article for a Norwegian magazine? So he duly did that. So then I started getting inquiries from Norway. And then I met another Norwegian girl who lived in Eastbourne down the coast from me. And she said, oh, there's an alternative fair in Oslo. So
Oh,
I said, oh, well, I'll take a punt at that then. So I booked a stand and I took my neighbour with me from upstairs. We booked into the hotel and I said, well, if the fair looks like it's going to be successful, I'll stay on in the hotel and do some one-to-one sessions. So
okay.
this girl, she quickly sold all my one-to-one sessions. So I went to reception and I said, can I extend my reservation? And they said, no, there's an Iron Maiden concert happening in Oslo and 40,000 people are descending on Oslo and there wasn't a hotel room to be had. So
Okay.
I went back upstairs and I said to my friend, oh, I can't extend my reservation. And she said, oh my goodness, we've taken all this money, we've taken all these appointments. What's she going to do? So I said, oh, well, I'll sort it out. So when we got to the fair, I said, I'm just going to have a little word upstairs. So I sat down and closed my eyes, and I said, now look, God, I've got a bit of a problem here. I haven't got anywhere to work next week, and I haven't got anywhere to stay. So could you sort that out for me, please? And I got a lovely whoosh of energy, and I said, thanks very much. And then the woman from the next door stand poked her head round and she said, hello, good morning, how are you? And I said, well, I'm fine, except I haven't got anywhere to work next week and I haven't got anywhere to stay. And she said, oh, you can stay with me. I'll go put you up. So I said, oh, thank you very much. And she said, I haven't really got anywhere for you to work. And so I said, well, I'll just take the bed for the night and I'll sort the other bit out later. And then as I've said that, another lady that I've been speaking to the day before came back and she said, hello, how are you? And I said, oh, I'm fine, except I haven't got anywhere to work next week. Oh, she said, come and work at my house. I've got a big house. So that was it. So I went to stay in her house eventually, and she took over all my bookings for me. And so I worked in her house for quite a few years. And then another friend came in and took over the bookings. So that's how I found myself in Norway. And I've forgotten why I'm telling you this now, of course. What was I saying?
It'll come to you.
Eastbourne. Eastbourne, told you about Oslo at the fair. Took you from upstairs.
Iron Maiden were in there, but you couldn't get anywhere. And there have been very, very interesting
I know,
life.
I've remembered.
Here we are.
I remembered. So the lady who took over my bookings, she had a daughter who was only 15 at the time. And she said, oh, I want to have a session of regression. And her mother said, no, you're too young. No, you can't possibly do that. And so anyway, when she met me, they came for a cup of tea. She said, oh, you can have your session. And this girl always could not have a shower. When she went into the shower, she had to sit down because she was so full of fear. Anyway, in the session, of course, she died in a concentration camp in the showers, when they had to take all their clothes off and then they were done with the Cyclone B gas. Anyway, so we worked out that that's what had happened to her, which is why in this life she was so afraid of going into her shower and having a shower. And then at another point in the session, she said, oh, my feet are burning. They're burning my feet. They're burning my feet. So she'd also been burnt as a witch too. So that was one instance where she had obviously been Jewish in a previous life. And then I had another woman who came to me when I lived in Brighton, and she was half Jewish in this life, but she wanted to know why she'd only been half Jewish. And so very quickly into the session, she suddenly went all stiff and said, oh, I'm in this terrible place, she said, and there are men here in long leather coats with Alsatian dogs, and it's very, very cold. And so she then described where she was, and then she said, there's a place that we're not allowed to go into, and there's a terrible smell here. She said, it's the smell of death. And then she suddenly went, verboten, 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 which means forbidden in German. And so we carried on in this session, and she said, we're standing on the edge of a deep pit, and there's a line of soldiers in front of us. And then the order came, fire, and all this line of people were all shot, and so they all fell back into this trench that had been dug, and there were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bodies. And so in her spirit body, she could look down on this terrible scene, but she knew that she was whole and perfect in her spirit body. And so that really answered her question, because eventually she went back up to the light and joined her higher self and her soul group, and she was fine after this really hideous experience. But it certainly answered her questions for her. She realized why she was only half Jewish in this life, because it was a kind of dangerous area to be in. So,
wow. And do you keep up? Do you follow up with the people after they've had their stories?
No.
Okay.
No, not you. No, some people will come back again to deal with something else or go into a different life, but not usually. It depends. If people want to take their inquiries a little further, then they may come back for another session, but
Mm.
not
So,
always.
so the imagination, there's a sense of knowing that this story for her represented something profound in her life
Yes,
that she could acknowledge, and
yes,
an aha moment that
yes,
came in.
definitely. Yes,
And with that
yes,
aha moment, the charge, if you like, was dissipated. So she could
yes,
normalize and
yeah.
not be half Jewish anymore, or not be Jewish, or just
Yes,
be
because
different from that point on.
if you die with something unresolved or on your heart or
Ah,
your soul, then
okay.
you have to come back and do it again, which is why those feelings are there. So,
Ah,
a lot of healers and teachers, I mean, all the healers and the teachers are back down on the earth plane now to help us as we go through these challenging times. But if you've been killed and persecuted and tortured in your previous lives, there's often a fear of stepping into the work in this life because, if you get involved in that stuff, you can be killed. It's dangerous. So there's a fear of being who you've come to be. And that goes with all sorts of things, fear of drowning, fear of flying, fear of all sorts of things. There has to be a reason for it, otherwise it makes no sense. So if you can find the reason for it and then understand why it happened, then the fear is dissipated and the karma
right.
is healed and you can move on and get on with your life.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's as if there's an unknown, unspoken, unconscious something
Yes, it's
that
always
just
coming from
gets in
your
the way,
unconscious.
and you don't know what it is, you don't know where to go. It just
Mm.
is like you hit the glass ceiling in the corporate world, or
Yeah,
you just hit the wall. Maybe it's the
yeah,
wall in the marathons that people have been running. There's a big saying, isn't there, and until you go
yes,
through the wall, even in,
yes.
there's a film, what film was it? It was Officer and a Gentleman, where there's a lady there, Seagull, get over the wall, get over the wall.
That's
uh
right.
so there are walls that we need to break down. Even Pink
Yeah,
Floyd had another brick in the wall. Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Yeah. And that helps whoever comes to you, between the two of you, finds that which will dissolve the wall that's in front of us.
Yes. I
Is
mean,
that about
I've had quite a few walls myself in this life. I mean, I went for a reading with a woman in Wembley many, many, many years ago now. And when you went to this woman, she channeled somebody called the Master. And the Master would tell you about the life that was the most relevant one to this one. And so
uh-huh.
he told me about a life 2,000 years ago where I'd been brought up in a very small and very loving family. It was in the East, and it was about the time when the trade routes were opening up and camel trains were taking goods from one part of the world to
Hmm.
another. And at the time, there'd been a great drought, and so water was there was a shortage of water. And we lived, this village that I lived in had an oasis, and it was very low. So the elders of the village decided to dig a new well, which was quite a mammoth task. And one of these camel trains had parked themselves on the edge of our village, and the people from the camel train were helping the villagers to dig this new well. And
Hmm.
there was one man on this part of this group from the camel train who I knew was dangerous to me. And so I kept myself in the house with the women, and I was about to marry my cousin. And we'd been brought up together. We were very much looking forward to our life together and having children, and everyone was very happy about it. And then the night before my wedding, it was very hot, and I stepped outside for a breath of air, and this man was waiting in the shadows for me. And so he abducted me, threw me over his camel, and abducted me off into the desert. And so this woman had a very wobbly voice who was doing the channeling. She said, "And he violated you many times that night." And so I was obviously raped and abused, and this went on for weeks. I had to walk beside his camel. And then eventually we got back to the place where he came from, which was a huge city. And I knew there'd be no help for me there because I was a very young woman. I had no help or anyone to assist me. And I had to work in a place that made shoes for the ruler. And I stayed in this place for 10 years. And I had 2 children by this man until eventually he took his focus off me and I had a little more freedom, by which time my children had grown up and I managed to escape. And so I took my children with me and I set off on this very, very long journey, this very circuitous journey to get back to my village again. But of course, I didn't know which direction we'd come from. So it took me months and months and months to set out on this journey. And I gradually I got very sick on this journey, and sometimes I had to knock on people's doors, and they would take me in, me and my children, sometimes for weeks on end while I recovered. And gradually on this journey, it dawned on me that not all men were bad, that some of them were very kind and generous and hospitable. And so I had to rethink things because I'd become very bitter and twisted by the experiences of what had happened to me. And eventually I did get back to my village again. Nobody recognized me because I'd been away for so many years. But eventually I found a place for myself in the family circle. I was never able to marry because of what had happened to me. The religion forbade it. And I had to spend the rest of that life trying to undo the damage that I'd done with these 2 children because I'd also taught them to hate. So in the channeling, they said it was a very important life because it had given me the opportunity to have both sides of the coin because I'd been brought up in this very loving, very kind family. And then I'd been thrust out into the world and I'd had this hideous experience. And then I was back again in this loving family. So I'd had both sides of the coin, as it were. So they said it was quite an important life. In this life, I fell in love when I was about 19 or 20 with a man and eventually married him. He wasn't a good husband. He was very unfaithful to me. He broke my heart. And after we'd separated, we would still meet because I was never I never hated him or anything. I could see that he was rather emotionally retarded, if anything. And one day he came to see me and he was just standing in the window looking out. And suddenly I felt the karma between us disappear. It fell off my shoulders like a cloak. And I got this sort of shuddery feeling. And I thought, oh, I wonder what that was about. And then, of course, years later, I discovered that he was the man who had abducted me into the desert 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
And so I had to marry him. You see, you have to come at it again from a different perspective so that you get another opportunity to heal that karma. And so that was the karma for me, healed from that situation.
Wow.
Hmm.
That's completing the circle, is it not?
Yes, absolutely completing the circle.
Wow.
And what about the
So
children
do you have,
from that life? Did they
go
come
ahead,
in?
Jeff.
Sorry, Jeff?
Did the children you had in that life, did they come through again in this life?
Well, I had 2 children in the early 60s, you see, who went off to be adopted. I'm not sure whether they're the same children, quite possibly were. When I found them again, I had our karmic charts done by a very famous karmic astrologer called Judy Hall. And Judy said that I'll tell you that when I met my eldest son for the first time, there's a program over here called Long Lost Family, and
Mhm.
in those days, if you were a parent with an adopted child, you couldn't legally go and look for them. It was against the law in those days. But I could go to this woman who was an independent social worker and ask her to find them. And so I went to see this woman called Ariel Bruce, and she's still the person that they use on Long Lost Family to do their research for them. And she was an independent social worker in those days. And so I went to see her, and she said there's about a 40% chance of you finding them. It's much more difficult finding children than it is finding parents, because the adoptive uh, parents changed the child's name as soon as they adopted. So if you have to start buying birth certificates, it can get very expensive. Anyway, she said there may be a chance because I'd had two children uh, in consecutive years. She said we can have a look at the electoral register, and that might give us a clue as to where they are. And so, anyway, I left her with it, and 6 months later, she rang me up and said she'd found them. And
Wow.
so we arranged, and Richard was coming to live in Australia. And so we didn't have a lot of time. Normally, you would write letters and exchange photographs and have a sort of bonding process. But we didn't have time to do that because Richard was leaving to go and live in Australia. So we had to do it rather quickly. And so she said to him, "Where would you like to meet, Janet?" And he said, "Oh, well, in a pub." So she said, "No, I don't think that's a very good idea because Janet might cry and she doesn't want the entire pub to see her in this emotional state." So he said, "Well, what about here?" And she said, "Yes, you can use my flat upstairs." So that's what we arranged. And then before I met him, she called me into her office and she said, "Look, I'm going to say something to you and I want you to pay attention because it's very, very important." She said, "You're not that much older than them. You're very attractive. Don't fuck him." And I said, now, you couldn't mistake
Okay,
that
okay.
instruction. She didn't say, "Don't get too close, don't fall in love, don't
So
whatever."
she
She
was
said,
very accurate.
she was very, very accurate. So you could not mistake that instruction because she said, "If you do, you will never retrieve the situation." And she said, "I'll say the same thing to him. So you both know that I've given you these instructions." So that was it. She said, "I think you'll get on very well with him because he's quite laid back." And so that was it. So we met and he came into the room and he said, "Hello, Mum." And he came over and he kissed me on the cheek and we sat and chatted and had a glass of wine. And then I took him out to dinner. And halfway through dinner, he said to me, "You know that thing that Ariel said?" And I said, "What, not to fuck you mean?" And he said, and we both went, "Oh," and we both laughed. Anyway, so we had a little wander around Covent Garden and we chatted and got to know one another a bit more. And then I took him to the station where he was to go back to stay with his adoptive parents before he went off to Australia. So I said to him, "What are you doing the next evening?" And so he said, "Nothing." So I said, "Well, I'm going to the premiere of a film that I was in. I've only got a small part in it, but you might like to come with me." And he said, "Oh, yeah, that would be great." So the following evening, we met in a pub, and again, of course, and we chatted and we talked about things. And he said, "I'm really glad you didn't have an abortion, Mum." And I said, "Well, to be perfectly honest, in 1965, that wasn't an option. You either had to pay a great deal of money to Harley Street specialists to have an abortion, or you had a backstreet job, or you had the baby. There wasn't a lot of choice in those days." Anyway, I said, "Look, we must be going." So we set off down the Haymarket to go and see the premiere of this film that I was in. So well, there we are, arm in arm. We're marching down the street, and suddenly there's this very strange energy between us, which was really quite sexual. And I thought, my goodness, that woman is absolutely right. I don't know this boy from Adam. I know he's my son, but I don't really know him. And Richard had been very promiscuous in his youth, and so had I. And so there was always, every time we met, there was this very strange energy between us. And so I had to hang on to my socks and, keep control of the situation. Because every time we parted, he'd say, "Oh, I'll just walk you to your car, Mum." And then we'd have a hug, and then he'd stick his knee between my legs. And, he was very provocative. So I knew it was me that would have to hang on to the situation. So when I had our charts done by Judy Hall, the
Okay.
karmic astrologer, she said that Richard and I had had lots of lives together, lots of lives where we've been lovers. She said, "You've been actors together in Greek theatre, where on stage you were playing mother and son, and off stage you were lovers." So there was always this kind of
Wow.
confusing energy between us. In Shakespearean times, we'd again been actors together and had a similar kind of situation then. And she said Richard had um, played all the sort of fairy parts in the Shakespearean plays. But as he grew older, he got rather bitter and twisted because he didn't have enough strength and gravitas to move on to the sort of heavier roles. So he wasn't very happy in that life. But we clearly had a lot of lives together where there'd been this confusion about the sexuality and who we were. So when I met my other son, there was none of that. We'd only ever had a mother and son relationship in the past, so it was much, much easier. So,
So the roles were far better defined
yes,
between,
yes,
whereas
yes,
with the, yeah, okay,
yeah.
yeah.
So once again, there's been a bit of healing to do because just in the previous life where I had to spend that life trying to heal the hate between my children and myself and the situation, in this life, of course, I had to explain myself to them. They had different fathers, which they didn't know about. They were brought up together in the same family, but they had very different they were very different personalities. They were either ends of the spectrum. My younger son was in the army and was very neat and tidy and liked order and
Yes.
structure. And Richard has dreadlocks and takes more drugs than you could shake a fist at. And so they're very, very different. So once again, I've had to kind of, do a bit of healing work, trying to sort it all out between us.
Yeah.
So a bit of karma
That,
there between us, between the three of us.
And what's
yeah.
is there another gentleman coming into your life, where you can discover the male anatomy? What's going on there?
I've had plenty of that, I can assure you. Not at the moment, though. I've had a very, very rich life with lots of fun. It's not all been good, but it's been rich, definitely.
Well, Richard.
So it's
Very good.
the integration of extremes.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Okay.
So just a question. So people come to see you for the past life. Do you actually, you brought those stories to us now, but do you actually go in the early days when you went to the different churches? Did you actually end up going and do past life regression? When that lady obviously just absent-mindedly said, "Oh, you're in the Tudor royal family type thing," and then you're over there at Mary Antwerp. Apart from that, was there anybody else who you sat down with and went through the whole exercise of dwelling into this whole scenario for 2 or 3 hours, and you realised, oh, if they can do it, so can you? How did that come
about? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand your question.
For you to do what you're doing now, and the concept of doing it for 2 to 3 hours, did you actually learn that by seeking someone else to do the same thing? You went there as a person?
I did a course. I learned how to do it. What I learned on my course bears no relation to what I do now, of course, because you develop your own techniques. And years ago, there was a woman called Dolores Cannon who I met through my shop. Actually, she came and worked. She did an evening with us, Dolores Cannon, and she was a past life regression therapist who wrote a lot of books.
Right.
And the woman who worked in the shop with me, she said, "Oh, I heard this marvelous woman, Dolores Cannon, last night. Shall I get her over and get her to come and do an evening with us?" So I said, "Yeah." So she rang her up. So Dolores came. We didn't advertise it, and we used my house, which was round the corner from the shop. We had to take all the furniture out of the sitting room because so many people came, and they were all packed in like sardines sitting on the floor. And so Dolores came and did her talk and talked about whatever it was. And then some years later, I met her again in Worthing when she was over here because she lived in America, I think. And she was talking about her own past lives. And afterwards, I spoke to her and I said, "You came to my shop a few years ago." "Oh," she said, "I remember that." She said, "They were packed in like sardines, weren't they?" Um, so I was thinking of doing a course with Dolores Cannon, and my masters said to me, "No, you don't need to do that," they said, "because what Dolores is doing, she's looking for subjects for information for her books. So what she uses is a technique." They said, "What you do is intuitively guided. So you don't need to take her course and you don't need her way of doing it." So that was quite interesting, actually.
Sure.
Hmm.
I had a chuckle to myself when you said you went to Wembley to meet the master, and it took me to a flash of Doctor Who and dealing with.
Well, actually, that master was, I think, Joseph of Arimathea, who I met at the time of Jesus because I was around at the time of Jesus. And I would get lots and lots of people over the years. I've had lots of people who've met Jesus, who've been around Jesus, who've been his disciples, who've been his friends, his family. And I used to keep thinking, I wonder why I keep getting all these people who've known Jesus. But then that was explained to me because when I went to Egypt about 25, 30 years ago now, we flew from Egypt to Israel and tacked on an extra week in Israel. And we landed at Tel Aviv airport on Easter Sunday. And we had an Arab tour company, and they said, "We're not going to take you to Jerusalem today because we think it's too dangerous. So we're going to take you somewhere else." And so I'd met up with an American girl called Jennifer. And so we didn't really care where they took us because we were so busy chatting and, finding out about each other. Anyway, when we got to this place, we got out of the coach and I started to cry and my whole body started to shake. And I said, "Where are we?" And they said, "You're at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem." And so I said, "Good heavens." Now, I was brought up in the Church of England, but, I left quite early because there were too many rules and regulations. So I wouldn't call myself a Christian or even very religious. So we went down the steps into the crypt, which is supposedly into the space where Jesus was born. Now, on the floor, I don't know whether any of you have been there, but there's a big silver star. And when you put your hands to it, it was like pins and needles. It was really very, very strong energy. So whether it's the spot where Jesus was born or whether it's become infused with energy because people think it's the spot, I don't know. But it was very moving and I was actually quite overcome. And so when we went out of this place, I sat in the upstairs church for a little while. And then Jennifer, my American friend, came rushing up to me. She said, "Quick, quick, you must come and see this other place." And so we went to the back of that church, out through a side door into another chapel. And then we started to go down some more steps into a different crypt. And once again, the tears rolled down my face and I started to shake. And I said, "What is this place?" And she said, "Well, somebody's just told me that when they found it, they only opened it about 20 years ago. And when they opened it, they found 50 tiny coffins from 50 Essene babies that were killed by Herod. It was the slaughter of the innocents." Well, by the time I got to the bottom of those steps, I was on my knees sobbing. And I couldn't understand what was going on at all because there were other people wandering around. They didn't seem to be deeply moved by this situation. And so I thought, well, one of these babies must have been mine. That's all. That's the only solution that I can think to this extreme reaction to this place that I was unaware of a few moments ago. Anyway, so I didn't I didn't think about it. That whole week in Israel was very strange because it was. I couldn't work out whether it was like scenes from my Bible as a child, or whether it was part of my soul, or it was a deeply moving week. Anyway, some years later, one of my friends put me in touch with a chap who thought he'd been Judas in a previous life. Anyway, so we started emailing one another about what we thought, and he was a pilot for South African Airlines who flew into London quite often. So on one of his visits, he brought his wife with him and his best friend, and so they came down to Brighton, and we all had lunch together, and we all got on very well. And they said, you should come to South Africa. They said you could work in our house in Johannesburg. We'll find you
Mhm.
some clients. And so that's what I did. So a few months later, I flew off to Johannesburg. I worked in their house. And while I was there, this pilot chap called David, he said, oh, I want to take you to this Afrikaans woman to have a reading with her. Her name's Magdal. And so off we went to see Magdal. On the way there, I thought, oh, I better think of some questions to ask her. And so I wrote down 2 or 3 questions that I wanted the answer to, one of which was what happened in that crypt in Israel.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
this woman Magdal channeled Archangel Michael and Jesus and various other bods. So I thought that she would be the perfect person to ask this question of.
Yeah.
So I gave her my questions when I got there, and indeed Archangel Michael came through, Kutumi came through, who's one of the masters, Joseph of Arimathea came through, and various other people, and they said, indeed, I had been in that life in Israel 2,000 years ago. I had been a man, and I had been Jewish. I was brought up in Qumran in the Essene community, and my wife and I only had one child. But it was as if we had offered that child as a kind of sacrifice so that God's plan could work out, and that Jesus will be able to get on with his life and to do what he came to do. So a lot of people had that experience of losing their children, which was a very traumatic experience because most of us only had one child, and we lost that one child and we never had any more. But it certainly answered my questions of what had happened and why I'd had such an extreme reaction in that crypt in
Mm.
Israel. And also why I had been around Jesus at the time, who I had known. I had been part of his outer family. They said I was a second cousin once removed from John the Baptist. So that answered a lot of questions for me, but it was a fantastic
Wow.
channeling, I must say. Yeah.
All right. Because Glastonbury's got a bit to do with Joseph of Arimathea, isn't it? With the hawthorn tree.
Yeah.
And have you collected all these stories and everything else? What's in the wisdom from the masters in your book?
Well, the wisdom from
Tell
the
us how.
masters, it has a lot of spiritual information. It doesn't have my stories in it that I've written in my
Okay.
autobiography, which I'm going to publish this year. So that'll be coming out soon. But in the book, I talk about the masters and who they've been in their previous lives. Some of them have, a lot of them, the masters we know quite a lot about, like Saint Germain, for instance. He was Jesus's father 2,000
Oh,
years ago.
Benjamin.
He,
Okay.
yeah. He was also the great prophet Samuel. He was in charge of the Temple of Light on Atlantis. In his last life on Earth, he was the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I, because if you look in the history book, she had this strange illness when she was very young, and they shunted her off to some remote castle, but in fact she was just pregnant and having a baby. But because she was unmarried, she wasn't able to acknowledge the child, so the child was passed on to one of her ladies in waiting and was brought up in the Bacon family, and he was Francis Bacon. And that was his last
Ah,
life on earth, and he ascended from that life into the light. But he's been back many times as a spiritual master, because he can create a body for himself and then use it. So he was around at the court of Marie Antoinette, apparently. He was also around in Germany. So he's had a lot of lives since then on the earth plane, trying to help humanity to deal with things. He ran a mystery school, apparently, at the court of the Louis and Marie Antoinette. So there are lots of masters who've had lots of interesting lives on the earth plane. And so I write about that in the book. I talk about your I am, which we started off this program talking about, your higher self, your I am presence. And so there's a lot of information about your I am. I talk about soul agreements, because you make a plan for yourself, before you come to the earth, while you're in that huge being of light that is the real you. Your higher self is a magnificent being of light. I think you've got that picture somewhere, Jeff, haven't you, of your higher self? So they're not flat rings like that. They're spheres of light that interpenetrate one another. And so depending on who you've been in the past, some of those colors will be stronger than others, depending on your interests and your evolvement and who you are and which ray you're attached to and which master you're attached to. I mean, there's a lot of information about the rays. So, I mean, that's a huge subject all in its own right. But while you're up there in that higher part of yourself, before you come to the earth each time, you just bring down a very small aspect of who you are, enough to deal with this life. The bulk of you stays up there, and that part of you holds all your knowledge, all your wisdom, all your love, all the karma you've already healed and dealt with is all held up there in that higher part of yourself. The little bit of you that's down here in your physical body is a very small part of you. So before you come to the earth each time, while you're up there, you make a plan for yourself. So you might have a look at that book of your previous lives. Now, I like to think it looks a bit like the photograph album in Harry Potter, where all the photos wave back at him. It's a bit like looking at movies of who you've been in the past. So as you look at that book of your previous lives, you might think, oh, dear me, didn't do very well in that lifetime. What did I think I was doing? So I better have another go at that. So you take that aspect of yourself and you build it into a plan for your new life. So you might look at other lives and think, well, I've got those skills, I've got those abilities, I've used those before. I'll take those back with me because that will help me to earn a living, or that will help me to be in service, whatever it is. So you take different aspects of yourself, things to heal, things to help your soul to grow, things to release and let go of, skills and abilities. So you build a plan for your coming life, and you do that with the help of your masters and your angels, because you're not doing it on your own. And so when you've worked out what it is you're coming for and what your challenges are and what your opportunities are, then you need some help with the plan. So you go to your soul group and you say, I'm going back down to the earth again, but I need some help, please. So I need a mum and a dad and some brothers and sisters, a husband or a wife, some children, whatever is involved in your plan. And so your soul group agree to be part of your plan, to play those roles for you and behave in whichever way it demands that your plan needs. And so once you've got the agreement of all those people, then everybody's signed the contracts, and then the plan goes into action and the players start to appear. Because we're just in a play down here. It is just like Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. And so when you've got the agreement of all those people who are going to be in your life on the earth plane, then the plan goes into action. So your grandparents arrive and their karma draws them together. Your parents arrive, their karma draws them together, and then you arrive as that little soul on the earth plane. Now, if you're coming to deal with negative karma, you have to come back to the earth to deal with it. That part of you is totally perfect. So you can't heal things when you're in the realms of light. You have to come back to the earth to heal things. So when your little soul arrives on the earth, that karmic energy goes zoop, and it's drawn back to you. And then that karmic energy draws you along your path, drawing towards you the people and the experiences and the things that you have chosen to deal with in this life. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So once you set off on your pathway, then the karmic experiences and the opportunities that you have chosen will be drawn to you. So it's up to you whether you take that opportunity or not. You know, everything is about choice. If you don't choose to take the opportunity and heal the karma, and you have to come back and do it again, which is really very boring. You might as well do it while you're here.
So the big picture here is that you're talking about you as a soul who wants to come and experience that. But really, to get that soul group to come along and agree to it, I mean, they might have already healed their situation.
They're here for their own purposes as well, you know, their own karma and their own growth and their own healing, but they have agreed to be part of your plan. And usually those are the people in your immediate circle, you know, your family, your friends, your work colleagues, the people that you come into contact with most of the time. There are other people on the periphery of your circle who you don't bump into very often because you don't have any karma with them, so there's no reason for you to meet them. But the people that, you know, get up your nose and irritate you and make you cross and all of that, you can be sure there's a trigger in there that needs healing when that happens, because those people will keep pushing those buttons until you do something about it.
Like you.
Okay. Like this morning, I was just thinking the same thing, Jeff. What have you two been up to? you know, offer. And he, oh, fuck me, what's going on here now?
Yes, well, there are, when you come into, you know, when there are people in your family or in your friends, or, you know, sometimes you, in your, especially with your friendships, you've just come back to support one another. So you find that the similar experiences keep happening to you. You know, it happens to her, then it happens to you, then it happens to you, then it happens to her. So it's like you're on a sort of parallel pathway together where you can support one another and help one another. And so those are just supportive friendships. You might not necessarily have any karma to pay off to one another. But if there are people who keep irritating you and getting up your nose, then you can be sure there's something either in you that needs dealing with or something between you. You know, souls make different agreements while they're up there. So you make single agreements where you come to complete some piece of karma for yourself or some challenge from the past. Then you also make joint agreements. Now, my mother and I, we had a joint agreement many, many years ago in Lemuria, which was the civilization before Atlantis. My mother and I worked in a temple together, and we both worked with energies. She wasn't my mother in those days. We were just colleagues. And my mother worked with absorbing energy, and I worked with radiating energy. So we worked in a very complementary way together. And then we went somewhere where the energy was very dark, and there should have been a group of us to support one another, but for whatever reason, it turned out that we're just the two of us. And my mother got caught up with this dark energy, and she wasn't able to release it from herself. I wasn't able to help her, and she blamed me, and she criticized me, and she blamed me, and she criticized me for the rest of that life. And she died not having resolved that situation for herself. So, as I say, if you die with something unresolved on your heart or your soul, then you have to come back to release it. So, in this life, she was my mother. We had a very challenging relationship because she would not have anything to do with spirituality. Because if you get involved in that stuff, it can kill you. It's dangerous. So when I had my shop, she would say to me, we were going out, don't mention that shop. And I'd say, why not? She said, well, they won't understand it. And I said, well, you're not really giving them the opportunity. Well, just don't mention it, she'd say. So she wouldn't have anything to do with spirituality at all. And so she absolutely adored me, my mother. She was very, very loving. She was a lovely mother. But when it came to spirituality, she wasn't having anything to do with it at all. So there was a whole part of me that she didn't understand and didn't want to understand. However, she died at 95. And so just in the last few days before she died, I was sitting by her bed and she was going in and out of consciousness. And so I thought, I'm going to tell her about this karma between us. And so I explained to her how we'd worked in this temple with these energies and what had happened and how she died with this situation unresolved. But I said, you know, Mummy, you love me and I love you, and you're going to a great place soon. You'll be absolutely fine. There's nothing to be frightened of, and you will be fine. And I love you and you love me. And as I said that, a little tear rolled out of her face and she just looked at me, and she died a few hours later. And so some months later, I was having a chat with one of the masters, and I said, "How's my mother doing?" And they said, "Oh, she's doing very well. She had a big soul wound that she's been healing, so she's coming on. She's doing very well." And I said, "So did we heal the karma between us?" And he said, "You did, but only because of what you said to her in those last few moments, which gave her the opportunity to release that energy for herself and let it go." So that was very good. So that was another little piece of another little loose end tied up. So that was an example of a joint agreement. And then people make group agreements, you know, where groups of people come back together either to heal some karma for themselves or have some project which they want to continue with. Years ago, when I had my shop, my friend Jennifer, who I'd met in Egypt, was over. She was a terrific healer, and she built up quite a good clientele working through my shop. And so one day I said to the girls in the shop, shall we go back and have a cup of tea and see Jennifer? And so we all went back to my house around the corner. And when we went into the house, Jennifer met us, and I said, "Oh, you don't look very well." And she said, "No," she said, "I've got a terrible pain in my stomach. I don't feel very well." And I said, well, we'll all go into the sitting room. And one of the girls said, "Well, why don't we give you some healing?" So Jennifer said, "Oh, yes, that would be great." So she lay down on the floor on the hearthrug, and the rest of us, I think there were 4 of us there, and we started doing the healing. And in those days, I was into drumming and American Indian culture and all of that sort of thing. And so we had 2 drums there. So somebody picked up one of the drums and just started very gently just making a sound on the drum. And I picked up another drum and also started doing the same thing. And we just then started sending the healing energy to Jennifer. And then suddenly the drumming got much more intense and much louder. And it was like I couldn't control my hand. And suddenly I saw this scene in an American Indian village. And the soldiers came and totally ransacked this village. And there was shooting and firing, and people were falling down. There was blood, there was fire, it was a terrible, terrible scene of carnage. And we were all there. The girl who worked in my shop, I could see her. And I knew she was my daughter. I could see myself. I had these long braids and my hair was grey. I was quite old. And eventually the drumming sort of tailed off and then came to nothing. And we all sort of came back into ourselves and we all opened our eyes, and we'd all seen the same scene in that village at the same time. And Jennifer sat up and said, "So, do you all know who you were?" And Caroline said, "Oh, Janet was my mother." I said, "Oh, you were my daughter." And somebody else said, "Oh, you were my sister." And one of the girls said, one of those soldiers was my father. No wonder I've always had such an animosity to him in this life. And Jennifer said, it doesn't matter who you were or what happened, but you have all been brought together to heal that situation and release it, because we are all eternal. So, I mean, that was another amazing experience, and an example of a group agreement where we'd obviously all come together for a specific purpose and all met one another through my shop.
Yeah. Can I ask you something that's come up while I've been listening and talking to you? That there's a great saying that we use a lot in England, which is least said, soonest mended.
Yes.
And from what you're saying, it's all that's been unsaid and unresolved that hasn't been mended. And it's the complete opposite. So the least said, soonest mended is like, well, just keep on chugging along, stiff upper lip, get on with
Yes,
it, girl,
exactly.
and don't rock the boat, don't poke the bear.
Yeah. Well, and
That's
that's true, because
avoiding.
if it, yeah, that's avoiding, exactly. But people don't like confrontation, so
No.
most people are very scared of confrontation, and it doesn't always have to be violent. You can have a conversation with somebody and explain how it makes you feel rather than blaming them. It's when we start blaming people that the trouble starts. So it's much better to try and have a conversation with someone and try and get to the bottom of it rather than least said, soonest mended. Is not a very good way of dealing with situations.
Okay. So, have you got any other little exciting stories to tell us? Any more little past life regressions that have
Yes, I've got
captured
lots
the
of them.
imagination?
I've got lots of them, yes. When I had the shop, there was a woman, an American woman, who was an astrologer as well. And she said one day, she did my chart, and she said, I've got 3 lives here. She said, in one life, you were a farmer in the West Country, and your farm failed. And to make some money, you became a slave trader, she said, and you treated your slaves worse than the cattle that you'd owned. And then she told me about two other lives, and she said, I've no idea why I'm telling you that, but anyway, there we are. That's what I get, or that's what's in the chart, or whatever it was. Anyway, so in 1983, I went to Sri Lanka, and I had a friend who was Sri Lankan, and he died, so his partner took me back with his mother, and we met up with other friends in Colombo. And then 8 of us went on a trip around the whole coast of Sri Lanka in a minibus. So we had a fantastic time. And when we were up on the east coast of Sri Lanka, Willie, who was actually a film director who lived in Canada, but he and his wife were over there for somebody's silver wedding, I think it was in those days. And so we went out on a boat. And Willie said to me, go on, Jan, put your snorkel on and have a swim round. So I duly put my snorkel and my flippers on, and I jumped off the boat and I was swimming around. And underneath was this beautiful cavern of blue water with, fish and turtles. And it was absolutely fantastic. And I was all right. As long as my head was in the water, I was fine. But as soon as I lifted my head out of the water, I had this feeling that something was going to come along and eat me. And so I'd stick my head back in the water again. And of course, there was nothing there. It was totally calm and very clear. I mean, I could see right to the bottom, hundreds of feet. It was just beautiful. Anyway, eventually, I tried to get back into the boat again, but there was no ladder. So my feet were wagging around under the boat. And eventually all the men in the boat hauled me back on board again, so I was fine. And so I had a wonderful time in Sri Lanka. And in fact, I'm going there again at the end of the month for 3 weeks to see the same people who I haven't seen since 1983. However, so some months later, there was a woman in Brighton who used to channel a Japanese being called Akado, who had only died in the 1950s, I think. And so she would bend over and she'd say, well, cheerio, I'll see you later. And then she would go down like this, and then she would come back and he would say, "Ah, Janet, how are you? Oh, very good. We have very good time today. Great fun. We have lots of fun." And so this Japanese chap called Okado would come through, and he would give you a full shiatsu massage with oils. And so she was an amazing channel. And so one day when Okado he had a great sense of humor as well, because he was pouring out the oil onto his hand one day, and he said, "Oh, she'd be very cross when she come back. Spilt oil on carpet." So he would laugh. So he was great fun. Anyway, so one day when he was doing the massage on me, he said, "Janet, you have fear of drowning?" And I said, "Actually, I don't have a fear of drowning," I said, "but I don't like being in deep water." And I explained to him how, with my head in the water, I was all right. But if I lifted my head out, I had this feeling that something was going to come along and eat me. And he said, "Ah, you see, in one life, you were a black galley slave. And just the age you are now, too old. Turfed you overboard. Lots of scavengers in sea at time. Don't worry, gone now, gone now." And so he'd lifted off this piece of karma. And I thought, well, that makes total sense of me being this farmer who was the slave trader, because then I
Yeah,
had to
yeah.
have the karmic experience of being a black galley slave where I got some of my own medicine. So that was another little instance of karma being healed and the whole situation being,
Yeah.
Ah.
yeah. So I thought that
So,
was very good.
so somewhere along the line, your higher self decided that it was time to be the galley slave and
Yep,
to not be
that's
the person that sold you off as a slave.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, sometimes we make decisions that are quite hard to understand. You're saying to yourself, why on earth am I going through this experience? Especially if you've been abused in some way. It's very hard to understand why you would choose that situation. But of course, you did choose it. I mean, the masters told me that very often, if you've chosen to be sexually abused in this life, in a previous life, you have perhaps abused yourself. Where people used to flagellate themselves and
Yeah, yeah,
wear all
yeah,
those
yeah.
hideous things around their thighs. If you
That's known
abuse your
down. Yeah.
body in that way, then and you die with that situation still on your soul, then you will come back into this life where somebody else abuses you, where you get the opportunity to have another look at it and to release it for yourself. Because everything is about forgiveness. You have to forgive either the person or the situation or yourself, whatever it is. You can only heal karma with forgiveness, with love and forgiveness. That's really all there is.
I noticed
But
over the years, when you go to a demonstration of clairvoyance, that I would say pretty close to everyone who comes through always says, "I never got the opportunity to say I love you."
yes,
Ah,
absolutely right. They always come to say either I'm sorry or I love you.
Mm. Yep.
Always.
wow.
Always. Because there is only love, there isn't really anything else. When you get up there, no matter how bad you've been, no matter what you've done in your life, there's no judgment. They're not going to be wagging a finger at you and telling you off. I mean, actually, it must. I'll tell you another story, actually. Another client came to me and he was very psychic. He had a life as a Egyptian priest at the time of Akhenaten. And in the session, we went up to have a look at this life, and he realized that he was very, very angry. Akhenaten was a great master who believed in the one God. And he thought it was quite wrong that all these priests were telling people to pray to all these different gods and animals and one thing and another. So Akhenaten turfed all the priests out of the temples and tried to institute a new system. And of course, all those priests were very, very angry with him because they lost their money and their prestige and their position and all of that. And this one priest, who was my client in this life, I took him to look at that life. And in that life, he had Akhenaten had built himself a new temple out in the desert. And this priest infiltrated himself into Akhenaten's palace, and he managed to put powdered glass in Akhenaten's food and kill him. And so in the session where after he died, I took him up to stand before the karmic board to account for himself. And he said, "Oh, Akhenaten was right. There is only one God. Oh, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done?" And then he said, "The strange thing is, there's no judgment here." He said, "They are sad at the way I have used my time on earth, but there is no judgment. There is only love." And so he was astounded by that. And I think really, if you've done some terrible things in life, it must be much worse to have those masters look on you with sadness rather than wagging a finger at you and telling you off.
Mm-hmm.
So there is only love. There is no judgment.
Wow.
Very
So
good.
I'm sorry and I love you.
I'm sorry and I love you. That's it. That's it.
Seems to be the portal into resolving karmic issues.
Yes.
And when we
And-
genuinely say, "I'm sorry,"
Yes,
it
you
has
have
a
to do it from your heart, you see. You have to
Yeah.
be, you have to feel it. If you can't
Yeah.
feel it, you can't heal it. And very often people say, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm not willing to forgive my father or my mother or my husband or whatever it is." And I say to them, "Well, that's entirely up to you. I can't force you to do it. But wouldn't it be better to do it now while you have this opportunity? Because you don't want to have to come back into another life and do it all over again, because that's really, really boring. So better to do it while you're here." So
Mhm.
most often they will take that opportunity and do it.
Yeah, there is a huge difference to, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way," and, "Oh, I'm really sorry.
Yes.
And I had no
Yeah.
idea it was going to have that effect on you. I'm so
Yes.
sorry. I'm really well." So there is a huge difference, isn't there, in the
There
quality
is. Yes.
of how one
Yeah.
says sorry or how one says, "I love you." "Oh,
Yes.
of course I love you." "You mean I don't love you?" "Oh, yes." Yeah.
Yes. So we should all take the opportunity to tell the people that we love how much we love them and how much we value them, and for playing those roles in our life, rather than having to wait and come back and do it through some medium later on in life.
Yeah.
So with the wisdom from the ascended masters, how would you summarize that then? Just
Do you mean the book or
yeah,
the wisdom?
Well, there's that which is written down, and there's that which you've experienced.
Well, this picture that you've got up there now, this is one of
Yes.
my paintings, and I painted it years ago. And as I was I used to go to a woman who did an expression painting class, actually another Australian, and she lived in Chiswick. And so I went to her for about 7 years, and we did 2 hours painting in silence every Tuesday. And so you stood for 2 hours in silence, and you could paint. You could just paint from your soul, really. You were just painting. It was called expression painting. And one day I was doing this painting, and as I was painting it, I kept thinking, "I know this place. This is very familiar to me, this place." And when I closed my shop, there was one book on the shelf, which was a theosophical book by Ledbetter, I think it was. It was called something to do with the masters. I've forgotten now what it was. Anyway, I hadn't read this book, and I put it on the shelf. And some months later, I thought, "Oh, I'll just have a look at that book." And it fell open at a line drawing that said "A ravine in Tibet," and it was identical to that painting. So it was in black and white. It wasn't in color. But when I was doing that painting, I knew it was really familiar to me, that place. So it's a ravine in Tibet. And 3 of the masters that I had worked with in the past, in my previous life, lived in that ravine in Tibet. So that was another interesting little moment. So in the book, there's lots of wisdom. It is an A to Z of spiritual knowledge. So it goes from abandonment down to, I think Zarathustra is the last Z in it. So it has lots and lots of spiritual information about all sorts of things, about your higher self, about the masters, about feelings and how you deal with life, and the laws of the universe, the karmic board. So yeah, lots of information there.
Yeah. I do remember you sending me some pictures. I don't know if we've got those to hand at all, Jeff. They've disappeared, have they?
Got 'em.
They were all right then. Maybe on how can I send you those? There's a do you remember the pictures that you sent me some time back, Janet? There's a
Yes.
picture of the
Of the painting,
round
yes, of your
painting.
higher self. It's the picture of your I am presence, your higher self.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Well, we haven't got that
even got one
to show
here.
you at the
No,
moment.
it doesn't matter. Not to worry.
It's on the Facebook Messenger, Jeff, if you can find it at all. No, not to worry.
You gave me the link
No.
only to Amazon for the book.
Okay then. All right. Is there any questions that you think we should be asking you that we haven't?
Oh, I don't think so.
Wow.
Because all the information will all be there. I can't think of anything else that is relevant.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, there was one, the I am presence. Oh, yes. Yeah, you see, I've got the pictures here in front of me now, but I don't know how to get them on the screen. So there we go. The magic presence. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we'll
One is my own painting, the big one, and the other one is from the Summit Lighthouse in America. So
okay.
But I just did my own version of it, so I'm not
that's fair enough.
stealing anybody's copyright or anything.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Janet. I really appreciate coming through. As a fine trip.
My pleasure. I'm glad we got there eventually.
Watch the eyes. The eyes say it all.
I would have done the Black. What's the name of Blackadder? Was that Queen Elizabeth? Was it Queen? Who was the one with Blackadder?
I don't remember the Queen. There was a Queen, wasn't there, in Blackadder? Yeah.
Yeah. It should go off with his head.
Oh, that's Alice in Wonderland, isn't it? Off with his head.
Yeah, she did that too.
Off with his head.
But Blackadder.
Well, they were very busy doing that. So we've all lost our heads at some stage or other in the past.
Well, it has been very interesting and sometimes very, very funny speaking with you. And we shall all remember, well, I will, some of the anecdotes you've just shared with us today. It's been a very interesting morning, and clearly patience and perseverance will get you there in the end, and we will simulcast. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for persevering with my lack of technology.
Yeah, well, you did brilliantly today, Jeff. We had a double whammy today, 2 different links in order to make it happen. So we'll thank the Irish there to be sure, and we're stuck with it. Thank you very much.
You're going to have to go into your YouTube channel and get rid of the previous broadcast. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll do that.
And I'll send you the links, Janet.
Okay.